The dust hung thick in the air that scorching afternoon in Nogales, Arizona. And Natalie Crawford wondered if this was how her life would end, standing on a wooden platform with shackles weighing down her wrists, while strange men examined her like cattle. The year was 1882, and the world had become a nightmare she could not escape. Her vision blurred as the auctioneer's voice droned on, listing her supposed attributes as if she were nothing more than property. And the last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the sea of faces below, some leering, some indifferent, all of them representing a future she could not bear to imagine. Strong arms caught her before she hit the wooden planks, and a voice rang out across the crowd with an authority that silenced even the auctioneer. "No one's buying you today." When Natalie's eyes fluttered open moments later, she found herself cradled against a broad chest, staring up at a sun-weathered face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. The man holding her had steel-gray eyes that held both determination and an unexpected gentleness. His jaw was set firm as he turned to face the crowd, still holding her as if she weighed nothing at all. "This auction is illegal," the cowboy announced, his voice carrying across the plaza. "Territory law says no person can be sold against their will, and I'm calling on Marshal Hendricks to enforce it." The auctioneer, a portly man with sweat staining his collar, sputtered in outrage. "Now see here, this woman owes a debt to Cornelius Blackthorne. She's got no money to pay it, so this is the only way to settle accounts. I do not care what Blackthorne claims she owes," the cowboy said, his arms tightening protectively around Natalie. "This is still a free territory, and I will not stand by and watch this happen." Natalie's head spun, both from the faintness and from the surreal nature of what was happening. She had been working as a seamstress in Tucson when Cornelius Blackthorne had accused her of stealing from his dry goods store. The accusation was false, but Blackthorne was a powerful man with connections, and no one had believed her protestations of innocence. He had claimed she owed him $200, an impossible sum, and when she could not pay, he had arranged this horrifying solution. "Put me down," she whispered, trying to find her dignity even in this moment of utter degradation. "Please, I can stand." The cowboy looked down at her and something in his expression softened. "Are you certain? You fainted pretty hard." "I am certain." Her voice was stronger now, though her legs trembled as he carefully set her on her feet. He kept one hand on her elbow, steadying her, and she was grateful for it even as she tried to stand straight and face the crowd that had gathered to buy her. A man pushed through the throng, a silver star pinned to his vest. Marshal Hendricks was an older gentleman with a white mustache and a reputation for fairness, though Natalie had not been able to reach him before Blackthorne had her seized and brought here. "What's all this about Vincent?" Vincent. So that was the cowboy's name. Natalie filed the information away, trying to focus on anything other than the humiliation burning through her. "Marshal, this woman is being sold at auction like property," Vincent said. "Last time I checked, we fought a war to end that kind of thing." "She owes a legitimate debt," the auctioneer protested. "Mr. Blackthorne has the paperwork." "Then let me see this paperwork," Marshal Hendricks said, extending his hand. The auctioneer scrambled to produce a sheaf of documents which the marshal examined with careful attention. Natalie's heart pounded as she watched, hardly daring to hope. Vincent still had his hand on her elbow, and she became acutely aware of his presence beside her. He was tall, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a face that spoke of long days under the sun. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, dusty leather chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a bandana tied loosely around his neck. There was something solid and reassuring about him, like he was the kind of man who did not make promises he could not keep. "These documents claim theft, but I see no court order," Marshal Hendricks said finally. "Did a judge review this case, Miss Crawford?" Natalie said, finding her voice. "Natalie Crawford. And no, Marshal, no judge would hear my case. Mr. Blackthorne said he would handle it privately, and the next thing I knew, his men were dragging me onto a wagon bound for Nogales." "That true, Vincent?" the marshal asked. "I do not know about any of that, Marshal. I just rode into town an hour ago and saw a woman about to be sold from that platform. Seemed wrong to me, so I acted." "Well, you acted right," Marshal Hendricks declared. "Without a court order, this auction is illegal. Miss Crawford, you're free to go." He turned to the auctioneer. "You can tell Blackthorne if he has a legitimate claim, he needs to take it through proper legal channels. This auction is over." The crowd began to disperse, some grumbling, others seeming relieved. Natalie's knees went weak again, but this time from the overwhelming rush of relief. Vincent's grip on her elbow tightened, holding her up. "Easy there," he said quietly. "When did you last eat?" The question caught her off guard. She tried to remember and realized it had been the previous morning, before Blackthorne's men had taken her. "Yesterday," she admitted. Vincent shook his head. "Come on. There's a decent restaurant over on Morley Avenue. You need food and probably some water, too." "I cannot," Natalie protested, even as her stomach growled at the mention of food. "I have no money, and I should not impose on a stranger, even one who just saved me from that horror." "You are not imposing if I am offering," Vincent said firmly. "And my name is Vincent Vance, so now we are not strangers anymore. What do you say, Miss Crawford? Will you let me buy you a meal?" She looked up at him, this unexpected savior who had appeared when she needed him most. There was no guile in his expression, no hidden agenda that she could detect, just a genuine offer of kindness in a world that had shown her precious little of it recently. "I would be grateful, Mr. Vance." "Vincent," he corrected with a slight smile. "Mr. Vance makes me sound like my father, and I have been trying to avoid becoming him for years now." Despite everything, Natalie felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Vincent, then, and you may call me Natalie." He offered her his arm, and she took it, grateful for the support as he guided her away from the auction block and through the streets of Nogales. The town was busy with afternoon activity, merchants hawking their wares, wagons rumbling past, children darting between the buildings in some complicated game only they understood. Natalie had never been to Nogales before her forced arrival this morning, and under different circumstances, she might have found it charming. The town sat right on the border with Mexico, giving it a unique character that blended American and Mexican influences. The restaurant Vincent led her to was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of cooking beef making her stomach clench with hunger. He settled her at a corner table and ordered enough food for 3 people: steaks, potatoes, beans, bread, and coffee. When Natalie protested the extravagance, he just shook his head. "You have been through an ordeal," he said simply. "You need to eat. Besides, I have not had a proper meal in 2 days either. Been on the trail from New Mexico, and trail food is never as good as people claim." As they waited for the food, Natalie studied the man across from her more carefully. There was a stillness about Vincent, a sense of someone comfortable in his own skin. His hands rested on the table, calloused and strong, the hands of someone who worked hard for his living. She noticed he wore no wedding ring, though that meant little in itself. "What brought you to Nogales?" she asked, partly to fill the silence and partly because she genuinely wanted to know more about this man who had changed the course of her life. "Work," Vincent said. "I have been working cattle ranches in New Mexico, but the outfit I was with got sold to a bigger operation." They brought in their own crew, so I was out of a job. Heard there might be work at the Copper Canyon Ranch outside Nogales, so I figured I would ride over and see. And instead, you found yourself interrupting an illegal auction. Instead, I found myself doing what any decent person should do, Vincent corrected. Though I will admit, when I first saw you up there, I thought I had stepped into some kind of nightmare. Could not believe that was actually happening in an Arizona town in 1882. Natalie felt the shame rising again, the humiliation of having been displayed like that. I did not steal from Blackthorn, she said quietly, needing him to know. I swear I did not. I worked hard, paid for everything I bought from his store, but he accused me, and his word carries weight in Tucson. No one would listen to my side. Vincent reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The gesture was simple but profound. I believe you. Those 3 words, spoken with such certainty, brought tears to her eyes. She blinked them back furiously, not wanting to break down in this restaurant, but Vincent seemed to understand. He squeezed her hand gently and then released it, giving her space to compose herself. The food arrived, and they both ate with the hunger of people who had been too long without a decent meal. As Natalie's stomach filled, she felt strength returning to her body and clarity to her mind. She began to think past the immediate crisis and toward the future, though what that future might hold, she could not begin to imagine. "What will you do now?" Vincent asked, echoing her thoughts. "Do you have family you can go to, friends?" Natalie shook her head. "My parents died of fever 5 years ago. I have an aunt in California, but we have not spoken in years. I was making my own way in Tucson, had a good business as a seamstress. But I cannot go back there now, not with Blackthorn's accusations hanging over me. He would just find another way to punish me for rejecting his advances." Vincent's expression darkened. "So that is what this is really about. He made it clear he was interested in me. When I refused his attentions, he became angry. A month later, he accused me of theft." Natalie set down her fork, her appetite suddenly diminished by the memories. "I suppose he thought if he could not have me willingly, he would find another way. The auction would have put me in debt to whoever bought me, working off what I supposedly owed. And who knows what they might have demanded as payment." "That is not going to happen," Vincent said firmly. "But you are right that you probably should not go back to Tucson, at least not until this is cleared up properly. Do you have any money at all?" "No. They took everything when they arrested me. My savings, my sewing supplies, everything I owned." Vincent was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "I have a proposition for you, Natalie. I know we just met and you have no reason to trust me beyond what happened today, but hear me out." She nodded, uncertain what he might suggest, but willing to listen. "I am supposed to interview for that ranch job tomorrow morning. If I get it, they will provide room and board along with wages. Most ranches out this way have a bunkhouse for single men, but some of the bigger operations also have cabins for married couples or families who work the ranch." Natalie's eyes widened as she realized what he was suggesting. "You cannot possibly mean—" "Hear me out," Vincent repeated. "I am not proposing anything improper. But if you and I were to marry, even if just on paper, you would have protection. A married woman has more legal standing than a single woman, especially against a man like Blackthorn. And if I get this job, you would have a place to stay, safety, and time to figure out your next steps. We could make it a business arrangement if you want. Stay married for a year or 2 until you are back on your feet, and then dissolve it if that is what you want." "That is insane," Natalie said, but even as she spoke, she could see the logic in it. She had no money, no prospects, and a powerful enemy who might come after her again. Marriage to Vincent would solve several problems at once. "We do not even know each other." "True. but I know you did not deserve what almost happened to you today. And I know I would not be able to sleep at night if I just left you here with no resources and no protection." Vincent leaned forward, his gray eyes intent on hers. "I am not asking you to fall in love with me, Natalie. I am just offering you a way forward, a chance to be safe while you figure out what you want to do with your life." She should say no. It was too strange, too sudden, too much like stepping from one impossible situation into another. But as she looked at Vincent Vance, at the honesty in his face and the sincerity in his eyes, she found herself actually considering it. What other options did she have? She could try to make her way alone, but with no money and no resources, she would likely end up in another desperate situation. At least this way she would have time and safety. "If I agreed to this," she said slowly, "what would you expect from me?" "Nothing you are not willing to give," Vincent said immediately. "We would have separate sleeping arrangements. You would be free to do as you please, go where you please." "I am not trying to control you or own you, Natalie. I just want to help." "Why?" the question burst from her. "Why would you do this for a complete stranger?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "My sister," he said finally. "I had a sister, Sarah. She got herself into trouble with a man who made her promises he did not keep. When our parents found out she was expecting his child, they threw her out. I was working a ranch 300 miles away, did not hear about it until it was too late. She died in childbirth, alone in some charity hospital, and the baby died with her." His voice was rough with old grief. "I could not help Sarah, but I can help you, so that is what I am going to do." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time she let them fall. "I am so sorry about your sister." "So am I." Vincent cleared his throat. "But that is my answer. I will not stand by when I can do something. So what do you say, Natalie Crawford? Will you marry me for completely practical and unromantic reasons?" She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound, but it felt good to laugh after the horror of the day. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, Vincent Vance, I will marry you for completely practical and unromantic reasons." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his whole face, and Natalie felt something flutter in her chest that she firmly told herself was just relief and gratitude, nothing more. They were married the next morning by a circuit judge who happened to be passing through Nogales. The ceremony was brief and businesslike, conducted in the judge's temporary office with 2 witnesses pulled in from the street. Natalie wore the same dusty dress she had been wearing at the auction, and Vincent wore his work clothes. There were no flowers, no music, no celebration. Just a quick exchange of vows and the signing of a marriage certificate that made them legally husband and wife. As they walked out of the office into the bright Arizona morning, Natalie felt the weight of the ring on her finger. Vincent had bought it from a jeweler's shop before the ceremony, a simple gold band that fit perfectly. He wore a matching ring now, and the sight of it on his hand made the whole situation feel suddenly very real. "How are you feeling?" Vincent asked as they stood on the wooden sidewalk, the sun already hot despite the early hour. "Strange," Natalie admitted. "I woke up yesterday morning as a seamstress in Tucson. Now I am a married woman in Nogales. It does not quite feel real." "I know what you mean." Vincent adjusted his hat, a gesture Natalie was beginning to recognize as something he did when he was thinking. "But we will figure it out as we go. First thing is that interview at Copper Canyon Ranch. The foreman told me to come by at 9, so we should probably get going." They had spent the previous night in separate rooms at a modest boarding house, paid for with Vincent's limited funds. Now they collected his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, from the livery stable and began the ride out to the ranch. Natalie rode behind Vincent, her arms around his waist, acutely aware of the intimacy of the position even though it was purely practical. The ranch was about an hour's ride from town, and as they traveled, Vincent told her more about his work. He had been a cowboy since he was 16, working ranches throughout the territories. He knew cattle, knew horses, and knew the hard work that went into keeping a ranch running. He was 27 years old, had never been married before, and had spent most of his adult life moving from job to job, following the work wherever it led him. Natalie, in turn, told him more about her own life. She was 23, had been supporting herself for 5 years since her parents died. She had learned sewing from her mother and had a real talent for it, or so her customers in Tucson had told her. She had been making a decent living until Blackthorn had destroyed it all with his false accusations and unwanted advances. Copper Canyon Ranch sprawled across the landscape. A main house, barns, corrals, and various outbuildings clustered together in the valley. Cattle dotted the hillsides, and Natalie could see several men working in the corrals. Vincent rode up to the main house and dismounted, then helped Natalie down. She tried to smooth her dusty skirt and wished desperately that she had something better to wear for this important meeting. The foreman who came out to meet them was a grizzled man in his 50s named Tom Sterling. He looked Vincent up and down with an experienced eye, then seemed surprised to see Natalie. "Did not know you were bringing your wife," Sterling said. "You did not mention being married when we talked yesterday." "We just got married this morning," Vincent said smoothly. "This is Natalie. Natalie, this is Tom Sterling, the foreman I told you about." Sterling's eyebrows rose, but he recovered quickly. "Well, congratulations. That changes things a bit. We do have a small cabin available, meant for married hands. It is not fancy, but it has a stove, a bed, and a roof that does not leak. If you are willing to take it, the job is yours, Vance. $40 a month plus the cabin and meals." Vincent glanced at Natalie, and she could see the question in his eyes. This was her chance to back out if she wanted, to say this was all too much too fast. But where would she go if she did? What would she do? She gave him a small nod. "We will take it," Vincent said, turning back to Sterling. "When do I start?" "Right now, if you are willing. We have cattle that need moving to the upper pasture, and I am short a man. Your wife can get settled in the cabin. My wife Martha will show her around, get her situated." Sterling stuck out his hand, and Vincent shook it firmly. Just like that, they had a home and an income. Natalie felt dizzy with how quickly her life was changing. Yesterday, she had been about to be sold at auction. Today, she was a married woman with a cabin on a cattle ranch. If someone had told her a week ago this would be her future, she would have thought them insane. Martha Sterling proved to be a kind woman with weathered features and a practical manner. She showed Natalie to the cabin, a small but sturdy structure set slightly apart from the bunkhouse. It had one main room with a pot-bellied stove, a small table with 2 chairs, and an iron-framed bed in one corner. A curtain could be drawn for privacy, and there was a small washstand with a basin and pitcher. It was simple, but it was clean, and after the nightmare of the past 2 days, it looked like paradise to Natalie. "It is not much," Martha said apologetically. "But it is solid, and like Tom said, the roof does not leak. You will have privacy here, which is more than the men in the bunkhouse get. Meals are served in the main house, breakfast at dawn, lunch at noon, supper at sundown. You are welcome to eat with the hands or take food back here if you prefer." "Thank you," Natalie said sincerely. "This is more than I expected, more than I deserve." Martha gave her a shrewd look. "Vincent seems like a good man. You are lucky to have found each other." Natalie did not correct her, did not explain that they had only met yesterday and that their marriage was a practical arrangement rather than a love match. Let Martha believe what she wanted. It was simpler that way. After Martha left, Natalie sat on the edge of the bed and looked around her new home. It was strange to think of it that way, but it was hers, at least for now. She and Vincent would share this space, though how they would navigate the practicalities of that, she did not know. They had not really discussed the details beyond Vincent's promise of separate sleeping arrangements. She spent the rest of the day cleaning the cabin, which did not need much work, and organizing the few supplies Martha had brought over. Vincent did not return until after dark, exhausted from a long day of hard riding. Natalie had brought food from the main house, and they ate together at the small table, both too tired for much conversation. "I can sleep on the floor," Vincent said after they finished eating. "Give you the bed." "Do not be ridiculous," Natalie said. "The bed is big enough for two, and you need proper rest if you are going to be working all day. We are both adults. We can manage to share a bed without it being improper." Vincent looked uncertain. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." She stood and moved to the washstand, presenting him with her back. "I am going to change into my night clothes now. You should do the same." They managed it awkwardly, both changing with their backs to each other, both hyper-aware of the other's presence in the small space. When they finally settled into bed, they each stayed on their own side, a careful space between them. Natalie lay staring at the ceiling, listening to Vincent's breathing gradually slow and deepen as he fell asleep. She had shared a bed with this virtual stranger, had married him, had agreed to make a life with him, at least temporarily. It was mad. It was impossible. But somehow it was also exactly where she needed to be. The next few weeks fell into a routine. Vincent worked long days on the ranch, riding out before dawn and often not returning until after dark. Natalie, determined not to be a burden, offered her services to Martha Sterling. The ranch was always in need of mending, she learned. Torn shirts, ripped chaps, worn blankets. Natalie set up her sewing supplies, which Vincent had purchased for her in town with his first wages, and began working through the mountain of repairs. But beyond that, she began making new things. She sewed curtains for the cabin windows, made proper pillowcases from flour sacks, created a quilt from scraps of fabric Martha gave her. It gave her something to do during the long days alone, and it made the cabin feel more like a home. At night, she and Vincent would share their simple meals and talk about their days. He would tell her about the cattle, about the other hands on the ranch, about the work that needed doing. She would tell him about her sewing projects, about conversations with Martha, about the landscape she was beginning to explore around the cabin. They were getting to know each other in these small moments, building a friendship based on mutual respect and shared circumstance. They still slept in the same bed, still maintained that careful distance between them. But Natalie found she was becoming accustomed to his presence, to the sound of his breathing in the dark, to the warmth of him beside her. It was comforting in a way she had not expected. One evening, about a month after they arrived at the ranch, Vincent came home with news. "Sterling wants me to go with him to Tucson next week," he said over supper. "We are taking a herd to sell at the stockyard there. Should be gone about 5 days. Natalie's hand stilled on her fork. "Tucson." "I know." Vincent reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that had become more natural between them as the weeks passed. "But Sterling specifically asked for me because I have experience with trail drives. I cannot say no without a good reason, not when I am still the newest hand here." "I understand," Natalie said, though fear twisted in her gut at the thought of him being in the same town as Blackthorn. "You should go. It is your job." "I will be careful," Vincent promised. "And I will keep my ears open, see if I can learn anything about Blackthorn and his accusations against you. Maybe there is a way to clear your name properly." The thought had not occurred to Natalie, but now that Vincent raised it, she felt a spark of hope. If they could prove Blackthorn had lied, she could reclaim her reputation, maybe even get back the savings he had seized. That would be wonderful, she said. But do not take any risks, Vincent. I do not want you getting into trouble on my account. I will be smart about it, he assured her. But I cannot just ignore this, Natalie. What he did to you was wrong, and he should not get away with it. When Vincent left with the cattle drive, Natalie felt his absence keenly. She had grown used to his presence, to their evening conversations, to the comfort of knowing he was near. The cabin felt empty without him, the bed too large, the evenings too quiet. She threw herself into her sewing, taking on more work from Martha and even beginning to make some items to sell in town. But still, the days dragged by slowly. She was in the cabin on the fourth day, working on a complicated piece of embroidery, when she heard horses approaching. Setting aside her work, she went to the door and felt her blood turn to ice. 3 men were dismounting in front of the cabin, and she recognized one of them immediately. Cornelius Blackthorn had found her. "Miss Crawford," Blackthorn said with false pleasantness. "Or should I say Mrs. Vance? I heard you got yourself married. Quite the quick courtship, was it not?" Natalie stood in the doorway, refusing to show her fear. "What do you want, Blackthorn?" "Just to collect what you owe me. $200 plus interest. Let us call it 300, shall we?" He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I know you do not have that kind of money, but I am prepared to be reasonable. Come work it off at my establishment in Tucson, and we will call it even." "I owe you nothing," Natalie said firmly. "I never stole from you, and you know it. Now get off this property before I call for help." "That cabin is pretty isolated," one of Blackthorn's men said. "No one is going to hear you even if you do scream." Fear spiked through Natalie, but she held her ground. "My husband will be back any moment. You do not want to be here when he arrives." "Your husband is in Tucson with a cattle drive," Blackthorn said smugly. "I made it my business to find out. So you see, you are quite alone out here. Now, are you going to come peacefully, or do my men need to persuade you?" Before Natalie could respond, a voice rang out from behind Blackthorn. "The lady is not going anywhere with you." Everyone turned. Tom Sterling stood there with a rifle in his hands, and behind him were 3 of the ranch hands, all armed. "This is private property, and you are not welcome here. I suggest you ride out while you still can." Blackthorn's face flushed with anger. "This does not concern you, Sterling. This is between me and the woman. The woman is married to one of my hands, which makes it my concern," Sterling said coldly. "Now move along before I decide to hold you for trespassing and send for the marshal." For a moment, Natalie thought Blackthorn might argue further. But faced with 4 armed men, he apparently decided discretion was the better part of valor. "This is not over," he said to Natalie. "You owe me, and I will collect one way or another." "You come back here again, and I will have you arrested," Sterling said. "That is a promise." Blackthorn and his men mounted up and rode out, but not before Blackthorn gave Natalie one last venomous look. When they were gone, she found her legs would no longer support her and sank down onto the cabin step. "Thank you," she said to Sterling, her voice shaking. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not come. Martha saw them riding up and came to get me," Sterling explained. "She had a bad feeling about them. Good instincts, my wife." He lowered the rifle. "You want to tell me what that was about?" Natalie explained the situation in Tucson, the false accusations, the attempted auction, how Vincent had saved her. Sterling listened without interrupting, his weathered face grave. "Blackthorn is a snake," he said when she finished, "but he has connections. You need to be careful, Mrs. Vance. And maybe you should not be out here alone while Vincent is gone." Martha insisted Natalie stay in the main house until Vincent returned, and Natalie was grateful for the company and the security. She spent her time helping Martha with household chores and sewing, trying not to think about Blackthorn's threat or what he might do next. When Vincent finally returned from Tucson, Natalie was waiting on the porch of the main house. The moment she saw him riding in with the other men, relief flooded through her. He looked tired and dusty from the trail, but when he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that made her heart skip. He dismounted and came to her immediately, his hands reaching for hers. "I missed you," he said, and there was something in his voice that suggested he meant it as more than just a polite platitude. "I missed you too," Natalie admitted. "Vincent, something happened while you were gone." His expression turned serious. "What happened?" She told him about Blackthorn's visit, about the threats, about Sterling's intervention. As she spoke, she could see Vincent's jaw tightening, anger building in his eyes. "He came here. He threatened you." Vincent's hands clenched into fists. "I should ride to Tucson right now and settle this." "No," Natalie said firmly, placing her hands on his chest. "That is exactly what he wants. He is trying to provoke you into doing something that will get you arrested or worse. We need to be smarter than that." Vincent took a deep breath, clearly trying to calm himself. "You are right. But I am not going to let him hurt you, Natalie. I swear it. I know." And she did know it. Vincent would protect her. The question was how. "I learned some things in Tucson," Vincent said after a moment. "I talked to some people carefully, asking around about Blackthorn. Turns out you are not the first woman he has gone after like this. There were 2 others, both accused of theft or some other crime, both forced to work for him to pay off supposed debts." "Where are they now?" Natalie asked. Vincent's expression was grim. "One managed to escape and left the territory. The other died under suspicious circumstances. Blackthorn claimed it was an accident, and no one could prove otherwise." Horror washed over Natalie. She had known Blackthorn was dangerous, but this was worse than she had imagined. "We have to stop him." "We will," Vincent promised. "But we need evidence, something solid that will stand up in court. I am going to keep asking questions, keep looking. There has to be someone willing to testify against him." Over the next several weeks, Vincent made several trips to Tucson, always with the excuse of ranch business but actually investigating Blackthorn. Meanwhile, Natalie remained at the ranch, always careful to stay within sight of the main house or other people. Blackthorn did not return, but the threat of him hung over her like a dark cloud. During this time, something shifted between her and Vincent. The practical arrangement they had agreed to was evolving into something deeper. Natalie found herself watching for him in the evenings, feeling her heart lift when he appeared. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. They began to share their hopes and dreams, their fears and regrets. The careful distance they had maintained in bed began to shrink as they unconsciously moved closer together in sleep. One evening, as they sat outside the cabin watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Vincent reached for her hand. It was a gesture he had done many times before, but this time felt different. This time, when Natalie looked at him, she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Natalie," he said softly, "I know we agreed this marriage was just practical, just a way to help you out of a bad situation. But I need you to know that for me, it has become more than that. I care about you, not just as someone I want to protect, but as someone I genuinely enjoy being around. Someone who makes me laugh, makes me think, makes me want to be better than I am." Her heart pounded in her chest. "Vincent, you do not have to say anything," he rushed on. "I just wanted you to know. If you still want to end this marriage once we get Blackthorn dealt with, I will understand. But if you wanted to stay married, if you wanted to make this real, I would like that very much." Natalie looked at this man who had saved her, who had married her to protect her, who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. When had she started to love him? She could not pinpoint the exact moment. Maybe it was the way he always brought her wildflowers when he found them on the range. Maybe it was how he listened when she talked about her dreams of having her own dress shop someday. Maybe it was simply the steady, reliable goodness of him, day after day. "I would like that too," she said quietly. "I did not expect this, Vincent. When I agreed to marry you, I thought it would be temporary. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like an arrangement and started feeling like a real marriage. You have become important to me, more than important." Vincent's smile was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "So we are doing this for real. You and me." "For real," Natalie confirmed, and then she leaned forward and kissed him. It was their first real kiss, and it felt like a promise, like the beginning of something beautiful. They moved into the cabin that night with a new understanding between them. The careful distance in bed disappeared as they held each other close, learning the shape and feel of each other. Vincent was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure Natalie felt safe and cherished. She had never been with a man before, and he seemed to sense this, treating her with a reverence that made her eyes sting with happy tears. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Vincent stroked her hair and murmured, "I love you, Natalie Vance." "I love you too," she whispered back, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Their happiness was complete, except for the shadow of blackthorn still hanging over them. But that changed a few weeks later when Vincent came home with news. He had finally found someone willing to testify against Blackthorn, a former employee who had witnessed him planting stolen items in Natalie's shop to frame her. "His name is Robert Hayes," Vincent explained excitedly. "He worked for Blackthorn for years, but they had a falling out over wages. Hayes is angry enough now to talk, and he says he will testify in court about what Blackthorn did to you." "Will it be enough?" Natalie asked, afraid to hope. "Combined with the stories of the other women he targeted, I think so. I spoke with Marshal Hendricks, and he is willing to reopen the case if Hayes will swear out an official statement." It took another month to arrange everything, but finally, there was a hearing in Tucson. Natalie and Vincent traveled there together, and Natalie's stomach was in knots the entire way. What if this did not work? What if Blackthorn found a way to wriggle out of it, but Robert Hayes was true to his word? He stood in front of the judge and detailed exactly how Blackthorn had framed Natalie, including dates, times, and specific items that had been planted. He also testified about the other women Blackthorn had targeted, providing names and documentation that corroborated Vincent's investigation. By the end of the hearing, even Blackthorn's expensive lawyer looked worried. The judge reviewed all the evidence carefully and then delivered his ruling. "The charges against Natalie Crawford Vance are hereby dismissed with prejudice," he announced. "Furthermore, I am ordering Cornelius Blackthorn to return all property and funds seized from Mrs. Vance, plus damages for her suffering. Mr. Blackthorn, you are also formally charged with fraud and false imprisonment. You will stand trial for these crimes in 60 days. Natalie felt like she could breathe for the first time in months. Vincent pulled her into a tight hug right there in the courtroom, not caring who saw. They had won. Blackthorn was finally facing justice. The money Blackthorn was forced to return was substantial, nearly $400 that Natalie had saved over the years. With that, she finally had real options. She could leave if she wanted, start fresh somewhere new. But when Vincent asked her what she wanted to do with the money, her answer was immediate. "I want to stay at the ranch with you. Maybe use some of this to buy fabric and start taking orders for dressmaking. I could set up a small business out of the cabin, serve the women in Nogales and the surrounding ranches." "You want to stay?" Vincent asked, his voice full of wonder. "This is my home now," Natalie said simply. "You are my home. Why would I want to go anywhere else?" Vincent kissed her then, right there on the main street of Tucson, not caring who saw. "I am the luckiest man alive," he said when they finally broke apart. "We are both lucky," Natalie corrected. "We found each other when we needed each other most. That is not luck. That is fate." They returned to Copper Canyon Ranch and settled into their life together with a new contentment. Natalie did indeed start taking dressmaking orders, and soon she had more work than she could handle. Women came from miles around once word spread about her skill with a needle. The extra income was welcome, but more than that, Natalie loved the creative work and the satisfaction of making beautiful things. Vincent continued working as a ranch hand, but Tom Sterling began giving him more responsibility as the months passed. He was made assistant foreman, which came with a raise in pay. Between his wages and Natalie's dressmaking income, they were building a good life together. A year after their marriage, Natalie realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be sure, and then told Vincent the news over supper one evening. "I am expecting a baby," she said, watching his face for his reaction. Vincent went very still. Then a slow smile spread across his face, growing wider and wider until he was grinning like a fool. "A baby. We are having a baby. We are having a baby," Natalie confirmed, and then laughed as Vincent jumped up and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the cabin. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Natalie asked, though she could clearly see that he was. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Vincent said. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "This is everything I never knew I wanted. You are everything I never knew I wanted." "You saved me that day at the auction," Natalie said softly. "But I think I saved you too in my own way. We saved each other." "We did," Vincent agreed. "And now we are going to build a family together. I love you so much, Natalie. I love you too." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Natalie had to cut back on her dressmaking work as she grew larger. Vincent was attentive and protective, sometimes comically so. He would not let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest every afternoon, and worried constantly about her health. Natalie found it endearing, even when it was also a bit exasperating. Martha Sterling became an invaluable friend and advisor, having raised 4 children of her own. She guided Natalie through what to expect and helped her prepare for the baby's arrival. Together, they made tiny clothes and blankets, transforming one corner of the cabin into a nursery space. When Natalie's labor began on a cool November evening in 1883, Vincent was beside himself with worry. He wanted to stay with her, but Martha shooed him out, telling him this was women's work and he would just be in the way. He paced outside the cabin for hours, driving Tom Sterling crazy with his anxiety. Finally, near dawn, a baby's cry split the air. Vincent burst into the cabin to find Natalie exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "We have a son," she said, her voice tired but happy. "Vincent, we have a beautiful baby boy." Vincent approached slowly, almost reverently. When Natalie pulled back the blanket so he could see the baby's face, he felt his eyes fill with tears. The baby was tiny and perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and Natalie's delicate features. "Can I hold him?" Vincent asked. Natalie carefully transferred the baby to his arms, and Vincent looked down at his son with absolute wonder. "Hello there, little one," he murmured. "I am your father. I promise I am going to do everything I can to give you a good life, to keep you safe, to make you happy." The baby yawned and waved one tiny fist, and Vincent was completely lost. He had never felt love like this before, instant and overwhelming and all-consuming. "What should we name him?" Natalie asked. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Vincent knew exactly what the baby's name should be. "Thomas," he said. "After Tom Sterling, who gave me a job when I needed one and protected you when I was not here to do it. Thomas Vance." "Thomas Vance," Natalie repeated, smiling. "It is perfect." Little Thomas was a healthy baby with a good set of lungs. Those first few months were exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and constant feeding and changing. But they were also filled with joy. Vincent had never imagined he could love anyone as much as he loved his wife and son. Every smile, every small achievement, every new development was a miracle to him. Natalie returned to her dressmaking work gradually as Thomas grew older. She would sew while the baby napped, often with Thomas in a basket beside her sewing table. Vincent would come home in the evenings and immediately reach for his son, playing with him and talking to him even though Thomas was too young to understand the words. "You are such a good father," Natalie told him one evening as she watched him gently rocking Thomas to sleep. "I am trying," Vincent said. "I think about my sister Sarah sometimes, about how she never got the chance to raise her baby. It makes me even more grateful for what we have." "Sarah would be happy for you," Natalie said. "I wish I could have met her." "She would have loved you," Vincent said with certainty. "And she would have adored Thomas." As Thomas grew from an infant to a toddler, the Vance family continued to thrive. Vincent was promoted to full foreman when Tom Sterling decided to retire. The promotion came with a significant raise and the offer to purchase the cabin they lived in, which Vincent and Natalie immediately accepted. It felt good to own their own home, to put down real roots. Natalie's dressmaking business continued to grow. She eventually built a small addition onto the cabin to serve as her workshop, funded by her own earnings. She took pride in being able to contribute financially to the family, in using the skills her mother had taught her to build something of her own. When Thomas was 3 years old, Natalie discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less of a shock and more of a joy. They knew what to expect now, were confident in their ability to handle another child, and Thomas would love having a sibling. The second baby, a daughter they named Caroline after Natalie's mother, was born in the summer of 1886. She had Natalie's auburn hair and Vincent's gray eyes, a perfect combination of both parents. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything, from feeding to changing to singing her to sleep. "Our family is complete," Natalie said one evening as she and Vincent sat on the porch, watching Thomas play while Caroline napped in her cradle beside them. "It is perfect," Vincent agreed, "though I would not say no to more children if that is what happens." "One thing at a time," Natalie said with a laugh. "Two is plenty for now." But as the years passed, no more children came. Natalie sometimes wondered if she should be disappointed, but she found she was perfectly content with Thomas and Caroline. They kept her busy enough, especially as they grew older and more independent. Thomas proved to have his father's love of horses and ranching. By the time he was 8, he was already helping with simple chores around the ranch, and Vincent glowed with pride watching his son learn the same skills he had mastered years ago. Caroline, meanwhile, showed an early aptitude for sewing and design. She would spend hours in Natalie's workshop, learning to make stitches and create patterns. Natalie loved having her daughter's company, loved passing on her skills just as her own mother had done for her. The family faced challenges, of course. There were years when drought hurt the ranch's profits, years when illness swept through the community. They heard through the grapevine that Cornelius Blackthorne had been convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison, which brought Natalie a sense of closure, though she rarely thought about him anymore. Through all the ups and downs, Vincent and Natalie remained solid. Their love had grown from that initial practical arrangement into something deep and enduring. They were partners in every sense of the word, supporting each other through difficulties and celebrating each other's successes. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent surprised Natalie with a trip back to Nogales, just the two of them. Martha and Tom Sterling, who had remained close friends, agreed to watch Thomas and Caroline for the weekend. They stayed at a nice hotel, had dinner at a fancy restaurant, and walked through the town where their life together had begun. Standing at the spot where the auction block had once stood, now replaced by a small park, Natalie thought about how different her life might have been if Vincent had not intervened that day. "What are you thinking about?" Vincent asked, his arm around her waist. "About how you caught me when I fainted," Natalie said. "How you told everyone that no one was buying me that day. You gave me back my freedom and my dignity. You gave me everything." "You gave me just as much," Vincent said. "Before I met you, I was just drifting, moving from job to job with no real purpose. You gave me a reason to put down roots to build something lasting. You gave me a family and a home. You gave me love. We gave those things to each other," Natalie said. She turned in his arms to face him. "I never imagined I could be this happy. 10 years ago, I was terrified, alone, facing a future that looked like nothing but darkness. Now I have everything I could ever want. A husband who loves me, children who make me laugh, work that fulfills me, a home that is truly mine. It is more than I ever dreamed possible. Here is to 10 more years," Vincent said, leaning down to kiss her. "And 10 after that, and 10 after that. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Natalie Vance." "The rest of our lives," Natalie agreed. "Together." They returned to the ranch renewed and refreshed, ready to dive back into the busy life of raising children and running their respective parts of the family business. The years continued to pass in a blur of activity and love. Thomas grew into a strong young man who reminded Vincent more of himself every day. At 18, he was already working full-time on the ranch and showing leadership abilities that suggested he might take over as foreman himself one day. He was courting a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch, and Vincent and Natalie approved of the match. Caroline, at 15, was already taking orders for simple dresses and doing beautiful work. She talked about maybe opening her own dress shop in Nogales one day, and Natalie encouraged the dream, knowing her daughter had the talent and determination to make it happen. Vincent's hair had started to gray at the temples, and Natalie had laugh lines around her eyes, but they both wore the signs of aging with pride. These were markers of a life well lived, of years spent in hard work and deep love. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset as they had done countless times before, Natalie leaned her head on Vincent's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "What is that sigh for?" Vincent asked, his arm coming around her automatically. "Just thinking about how grateful I am for all of this. For you, for our children, for this life we have built. I know it started in such a strange way, but I would not change a single moment of it. Not even the part where you almost got sold at auction?" Vincent asked with gentle humor. "Not even that," Natalie said firmly. "Because that moment brought me you. It brought me everything I have now. If I had to go through it all again to end up here, I would do it in a heartbeat." Vincent kissed the top of her head. "You are the strongest woman I know, Natalie Vance. The bravest, most determined, most talented, most beautiful woman I have ever met. I thank God every day that I was in Nogales that afternoon, that I was there to catch you when you fell." "I thank God for that too," Natalie said softly. "You saved me, Vincent, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Vincent corrected, echoing what she had said to him years ago. And we built something beautiful together. Thomas came out of the house then, Caroline right behind him, both of them arguing good-naturedly about something inconsequential. They stopped when they saw their parents on the porch, and Thomas grinned. "You two being mushy again," he teased. "Always," Vincent said without shame. "Come sit with us, watch the sunset." The four of them sat together on the porch, talking and laughing as the sky turned brilliant shades of orange and purple and finally deep blue. Natalie looked at her family, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was everything. This was more than enough. This was the happy ending she had never dared to dream of during those dark days in Tucson. The years continued to flow by like water, bringing changes and challenges but also deep joy. Thomas married his sweetheart and eventually took over as foreman of Copper Canyon Ranch, making Vincent swell with pride. Caroline did indeed open her dress shop in Nogales, quickly gaining a reputation for quality work and creative designs. Natalie helped her get started, and they often worked together on special orders. Vincent and Natalie became grandparents multiple times over. Thomas and his wife had 3 children, while Caroline married a kind banker and had 2. The ranch cabin that had once held just the 2 of them now rang with the laughter of grandchildren during Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings. As they entered their 50s, Vincent and Natalie both slowed down a bit. Vincent's joints ached from decades of hard ranch work, and Natalie's eyes sometimes struggled with the fine detail work of sewing. But they adapted, finding new ways to contribute and stay active. Vincent took on more administrative duties, training the younger hands rather than doing the hard physical labor himself. Natalie focused on designing and cutting patterns, leaving the intricate stitching to Caroline and the young women her daughter had hired. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Tom and Martha Sterling, both elderly now but still spry, attended as honored guests. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and speeches that made both Vincent and Natalie tear up. "My parents have the greatest love story I know," Caroline said in her toast. "They met in the most unlikely of circumstances, but they built something beautiful together. They taught me that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day. They taught me about courage and determination and the importance of standing up for what is right. I am so grateful to be their daughter." Thomas stood next and raised his glass. "To my father, who showed me what it means to be a good man. And to my mother, who showed me that strength comes in many forms. You two are my heroes, and I hope to build as strong a marriage and family as you have." Vincent and Natalie stood together, hands clasped as their children and grandchildren applauded. Vincent cleared his throat, clearly emotional. 25 years ago, I made the best decision of my life," he said. "I saw a woman who needed help and I helped her, but what started as a simple act of decency turned into the greatest blessing I could have imagined. Natalie, you have made every day of these 25 years worth living. You have given me purpose and joy and a love so deep it still takes my breath away. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Natalie was crying now, happy tears streaming down her face. "Vincent Vance, you caught me when I was falling and you never let me go. You gave me safety and freedom, respect and love. You have been my partner, my best friend, my great love. These 25 years have been the happiest of my life, and I look forward to however many more years God grants us together. I love you with all my heart." They kissed then, to the cheers and applause of their family and friends. It was a moment of pure joy, a celebration of not just 25 years but of the life they had built, the love they had nurtured, the family they had created together. As the party wound down and the guests departed, Vincent and Natalie found themselves alone again on their porch, watching the stars come out one by one. "Quite a day," Vincent said. "Quite a life," Natalie corrected. "Vincent, do you ever think about what might have happened if you had not been in Nogales that day? If you had not stopped the auction?" "Sometimes," Vincent admitted. "But then I remember that I was there. I did stop it, and everything that came after was meant to be." "Fate," Natalie said. "Fate," Vincent agreed. "Or maybe just dumb luck. But either way, I am grateful for it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Vincent said, "You know what I remember most about that day? Not just catching you when you fainted, but the look in your eyes when you woke up. You were scared, but also defiant. Even in your worst moment, you had this core of strength that refused to be broken. That is what made me want to help you. That is what made me fall in love with you. I was so frightened," Natalie confessed, "but you made me feel safe. From that very first moment, even when I did not know you, even when I had no reason to trust anyone, you made me feel like everything might actually be okay. And you were right. Everything was more than okay. Everything was perfect." More years passed, bringing the inevitable sorrows of aging. Tom Sterling passed away peacefully in his sleep, and Martha followed him just a year later. Vincent and Natalie mourned their friends, grateful for the years they had shared but feeling the loss deeply. Their own health challenges came. Vincent had a scare with his heart, but recovered after some scary weeks. Natalie developed arthritis in her hands, which eventually forced her to give up sewing entirely. She hated losing that part of her identity, but Caroline made sure to include her in the dress shop in other ways, asking her opinion on designs and having her manage the business side of things. Through it all, they had each other. That was the constant, the thing that never changed. No matter what challenges they faced them together. When Vincent was 65, he officially retired from ranch work, handing over full control to Thomas. It was a bittersweet moment, letting go of work that had defined so much of his life. But he was also ready. His body was tired, and he wanted to spend his remaining years enjoying his family rather than working himself into the ground. He and Natalie settled into a new rhythm, one of leisure and relaxation. They took walks together each morning, weather permitting. They spent afternoons reading or playing cards. They hosted their grandchildren for visits and spoiled them shamelessly. It was a good life, a peaceful life, the earned rest after decades of hard work. On their 40th wedding anniversary, they celebrated quietly with just their immediate family. Vincent was slower now, moving carefully to accommodate his aging joints. Natalie's hair had gone completely silver, and she relied on a cane to get around. But when Vincent took her in his arms for a slow dance to music their grandson played on his guitar, they moved together with the ease of long practice. 40 years, Natalie marveled. "How did we get to be so old?" "Speak for yourself," Vincent joked. "I am still young at heart." "We both are," Natalie agreed. "I certainly do not feel 63. Well, most days I do not feel 63. Some days I feel every one of those years plus a few extra." "I know what you mean." Vincent held her close, swaying to the music, "but I would not trade a single one of those years." "Every moment with you has been a gift, Natalie, even the hard moments. Especially the hard moments, because those are the times when we learned how strong we were together." "We have had a good life," Natalie said. "A really good life. I have no regrets. Neither do I." As they danced, Natalie thought back to that terrified young woman standing on an auction block, certain her life was over. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right. That a cowboy with kind eyes would save her, and that salvation would turn into the greatest love she could imagine. That she would have children and grandchildren, would build a business and a home, would know 40 years of happiness with a man who treasured her. But that young woman was gone now, transformed by time and love into the woman Natalie had become. And that was exactly as it should be. Vincent and Natalie lived to see their 50th anniversary, an achievement they celebrated with their entire extended family. By then they were both quite elderly, moving slowly and tiring easily. But their minds were sharp, and their love was as strong as ever. They spent their final years in the cabin they had made their home for over 5 decades. Their children and grandchildren visited frequently, filling the small space with noise and love. Vincent often sat on the porch, watching the ranch activities with satisfaction, knowing his son was carrying on the work he had done for so many years. Natalie passed away first, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 71. Vincent was devastated by the loss but found comfort in knowing she had not suffered, that she had simply slipped away quietly in the night. He missed her with an ache that never really diminished, but he was surrounded by family and by memories of their life together. He lived another 3 years, long enough to see his youngest grandchild get married, long enough to hold his first great-grandchild. When he died at the age of 77, it was with Natalie's name on his lips and their children holding his hands. Thomas and Caroline buried their parents side by side in the small cemetery on a hill overlooking Copper Canyon Ranch. The headstones were simple but elegant, and Caroline made sure they were inscribed with words that captured the essence of her parents' relationship. Vincent Vance, beloved husband and father, he caught her. When she fell, Natalie Vance, beloved wife and mother, he said no one was buying her that day. The story of how Vincent and Natalie met became family legend, passed down through generations. Their grandchildren told it to their own children, who told it to theirs. It became a story about courage and kindness, about standing up for what is right, about how the most unlikely beginnings can lead to the greatest loves. The dress shop Caroline had started eventually expanded, becoming a successful business that lasted for decades. The Vance family continued to run Copper Canyon Ranch, with Thomas's children and grandchildren carrying on the tradition. The little cabin where Vincent and Natalie had built their life was preserved and maintained, a tangible reminder of where it all began. Years became decades, and decades became over a century. But the story endured. The story of a woman who fainted at an auction block, and a cowboy who caught her and said those 6 simple words that changed both their lives forever. No one's buying you today. It was a story of rescue and redemption, of practical arrangements that became profound love, of 2 people who found each other at exactly the right moment and built something beautiful together. It was a reminder that love can come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest romances start with a simple act of human kindness. Vincent and Natalie Vance had lived well, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that extended far beyond their years. They had faced challenges and overcome them. They had built a family and a life that mattered. They had found each other in the worst of circumstances and created the best of outcomes, and in the end, that was the greatest achievement of all. Not the ranch they helped build, not the business they created, not even the children they raised, though all those things were important. The greatest achievement was simply this: they loved each other well. They loved each other faithfully. They loved each other from that first improbable meeting in 1882, until death finally parted them over half a century later. It was, by any measure, a love story for the ages. A Wild West romance that proved true love can bloom anywhere, even on a dusty auction block in Nogales, Arizona, when a brave cowboy looked at a frightened woman and decided that some things were worth fighting for. And they lived happily, truly, deeply, profoundly happily ever after. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their love proven through the test of time. From that moment when Vincent caught Natalie as she fell, through 50 years of marriage, through children and grandchildren and all the joys and sorrows life brought, they had been there for each other. They had built something lasting from that impossible beginning, and their descendants would carry forward the legacy of that love for generations to come. The sun set over Copper Canyon Ranch on the day of Vincent's funeral, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Thomas stood with his arm around Caroline as they watched the light fade, both of them thinking about their parents and the incredible love story they had witnessed throughout their lives. "They really did have the perfect romance," Caroline said quietly. "They did," Thomas agreed. From the moment Dad caught Mom at that auction to the day he died saying her name. 53 years of love. That is what I want people to remember about them. Not how they met, though that was important, but how they loved each other every single day, no matter what came their way. "That is exactly what we will remember," Caroline promised. "And that is exactly what we will teach our children and grandchildren. Love like Mom and Dad had is rare and precious, and it is worth fighting for." They stood together in silence as the stars began to appear, thinking about Vincent and Natalie, imagining them together again somewhere beyond this world. The love story that began on a dusty platform in Nogales had reached its natural conclusion, but the impact of that love would ripple forward through time, touching lives not yet born, inspiring hearts not yet created. It was a perfect ending to a perfect love. And in the generations that followed, whenever someone in the Vance family needed hope or inspiration, they would tell the story of the cowboy who caught the falling woman and refused to let anyone buy her. They would tell the story of a marriage that started as convenience and became the deepest love. They would tell the story of Vincent and Natalie, and they would remember that true love, real love, lasting love is always worth fighting for, worth believing in, worth celebrating. The end had come, but the legacy remained, and that was exactly how it should be. Vincent and Natalie Vance had lived fully, loved completely, and left the world better than they found it. Their story was finished, their journey complete, their happily ever after fully realized. Nothing was left unresolved, no loose ends remained. They had lived, loved, raised their family, built their legacy, and passed peacefully into whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that they had done it all together. It was the perfect closing to an improbable love story that spanned over 50 years, bridged two lives from desperation to joy, and proved that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures. Vincent and Natalie Vance had their happy ending, had lived it fully, and had passed that legacy of love on to everyone who came after them. Their story was complete,